You have just heard the grunts of a silverback mountain gorilla, the subject of this continuing three-part series, Gorillas in Our Midst, from Our Wild World. Welcome to Our Wild World. I'm your host, Dr. John David Alferts. I've been an educator for over 38 years, serving as an adjunct professor, superintendent, principal, and teacher. Whenever we can, my wife Christina, also an educator, and I are trekking into the wild to see our two-legged, four-legged, and winged friends in the animal kingdom. Together we've been entertained by a mountain gorilla in the impenetrable forest as she played on the stomach of her napping silverback dad. We've been startled by the thunderous roaring of two aggressive hippos in the Okavango Delta as they fought behind our tents, shaking the ground as they did so. We've had a curious African lion lie down outside our tent as she played with our tent bag. While hiking in the bush at Lake Tanganyika, I've come within 75 yards of an elephant family drinking from a stream. At Meru National Park in Kenya, Christina and I came eye to eye with a black mamba who lifted herself up just 12 feet from us, warning us that she was about to strike. After all my time in the bush, I have a story or two to tell. So it makes sense that I'm combining my passion for teaching with my passion for wildlife to launch Our Wild World, introducing listeners to, as the Lakota would say, Bitakuye Oyasin, or all our relations in the animal world. Each episode is meticulously researched and includes my first-hand observations from the bush. I think you'll find this a podcast like no other. As you listen, be sure to check out our sister social media pages on Facebook, Instagram, X, and Blue Sky for photos and videos that Christina and I have taken of the wildlife featured in each podcast episode. And now, let's begin. In this special three-part gorilla series from Our Wild World, we are exploring the behavior of both lowland and mountain gorillas. In this episode, Part 3, you'll hear about the amazing treks my wife and I made to see the mountain gorillas that Fosse studied at Volcanoes National Park in Rwanda, as well as at Uganda's Bwindi Impenetrable Forest, and learn additional details about their behavior. If you haven't listened to the first two episodes, you'll want to do that as well. In the first episode, we focused on the eastern lowland gorillas, and I shared my 1991 trip to see them at Kahuzi-Biega National Park in what was then Zaire and is now the Democratic Republic of the Congo. I shared with listeners how I was accused of being a Ugandan rebel trying to assassinate Rwandan's president and was detained by soldiers. In Part 2, we focused on the behavior of mountain gorillas and learned about their great heroine, Dian Fossey, who sacrificed her life to save the species. We explored her still unsolved murder, and I shared with listeners the most likely suspects. Part 2 also included Coco the gorilla and the amazing work that Penny Patterson did with Coco, teaching Coco hundreds of American Sign Language words. In the fall of 2016, one of my good friends, Joe DiGiovanni, was diagnosed with an aggressive form of prostate cancer that he fought valiantly, but which eventually killed him. My wife Christina and I realized that every day was precious, and that yes, our days are indeed numbered. Rather than wait to do the things that were important to us, we would do them now. We decided too many people save their dreams for retirement. But what happens when retirement never comes? Don't put off for tomorrow what you really want to do today. There's no guarantee that tomorrow will come. I had been dreaming of returning to Africa ever since my first trip in 1991. So when Chris said to me,
"What are we waiting for? We've dreamed of going to Africa for years. Let's go."
she didn't need to tell me twice. We began planning our first of what would become 5 trips, 5 and counting, to Africa together, and some of the greatest adventures of our marriage. For our first trip to Africa together, I really wanted Chris to experience it as I had 26 years before. I knew we had to make it an overland camping trip. Overlanding brings adventurous people of all ages together in a way that no other form of travel does. It's also very economical. Approximately 16 to 20 travelers from all over the world travel together in a truck. Everyone has a job to do every day, and cooking duties rotate amongst the group about every 3 days. The overland company I went with in 1991, Gerba Expeditions, no longer exists, so we went with Dragoman. Their motto, "It's the journey, not just the destination," is one they truly live by. We took a 3-week trip through Kenya, Uganda, and Rwanda. To be honest, I was a little bit nervous about returning to Kigali, Rwanda, as I had been detained by soldiers there in 1991 and ordered to leave the country within 24 hours. But the Rwandan government is completely different now, and I hedged my bets that no one would remember me taking a picture of the presidential palace 26 years ago. I was right. Rwanda is called the land of 1,000 hills. Each one is dotted with farmers' fields and little villages. It is often referred to as the Switzerland of Africa. For such a beautiful country, it is hard to believe that a bloody genocide took place there. During 6 weeks in 1994, Hutus murdered nearly 1 million people, primarily Watutsis, but also the Twa people and moderate Hutus. That horror is incredibly and movingly documented in Kigali's Genocide Museum. The museum is the final resting place of nearly 250,000 victims of the genocide, buried in mass graves in and around the museum. The most difficult rooms were the ones filled with skulls and bones. A children's room was also very difficult to get through. Everywhere photos of the victims seemed to plead with us not to forget the atrocities. From the museum in Kigali, we headed to Ruhengeri, where we spent the next several nights at the Centre Pastoral Notre Dame de Fatima, a lovely hostel with Catholic affiliation. The simple hotel had a chapel that was filled with worshipers throughout the day. The Ruhengeri Catholic Cathedral is located just up the hill from the center. A football-sized field separates the two. I couldn't help but notice the large ravens who seemed to be ever present in the field, almost like silent sentinels. The simple hotel rooms at the Centre Pastoral Notre Dame de Fatima resembled those of a monastery or a convent. The center was, after all, affiliated with the Catholic Church. Each small room had 2 single beds. Toilets were located at either side of the room blocks. Nuns were praying all hours of the day in the chapel. Their singing was beautiful to hear. I did go in several times during our stay there to say a prayer of thanks. Even with the spiritual connection, the center had a dark, eerie feeling about it. During the day, large black crows circled around the place, perching atop the compound where our rooms were, or in the nearby field in front of the Gothic Cathedral Notre Dame de Fatima Ruhengeri. At night, after dinner, when we walked back across the street to the compound where our room was, it was pitch black and downright creepy. After so many nights of sleeping on the ground, Chris and I should have slept like babies in actual beds. But each night, I had the most frightening nightmares. I dreamt of genocide. Screams filled the air as Hutu machetes struck down Tutsis, Twas, and moderate Hutus. Tutsis were poured into the Cathedral Notre Dame de Fatima for refuge. In my dream, a few Tutsis had taken refuge in our sparse hotel room as Hutus armed with machetes shouted outside our door, trying to break it down. I woke with a start as I realized the screams and shouts I heard were not just a dream. They were coming from the street. As I cautiously opened the door, there was a political rally taking place in the street, despite the late hour. President Paul Kagame was once again running for re-election, and his supporters were barnstorming the countryside. The noise of the rally had filled my dream. During the genocide, many Tutsis took refuge in churches. Some were saved there, but others were murdered, even in the houses of God. Several Rwandans told one of our Dragoman guides that the Cathedral Notre Dame de Fatima was one of the sites where Tutsis were massacred during the genocide. They said the field behind the center was a burial ground for victims of the genocide. That would explain why so many crows stood silent vigil on the roof. It would also explain the sign commemorating the genocide's victims, which adorned the local football stadium across the street from the center. Later, I spoke to others in our group who were haunted by similar nightmares as mine each night they slept at the center. Perhaps the tortured ghosts of the genocide reach out to us still. On our guerrilla trekking day, we woke before dawn at 4:45 a.m. to take our trek to see the mountain gorillas of Volcanoes National Park that Dian Fossey made famous in Gorillas of the Mist. For me, this was the fulfillment of a lifelong dream, as I had not been able to visit the mountain gorillas at Volcanoes National Park during my first trip to Africa because the wrong kind of gorillas, armed soldiers from Uganda, were occupying it back in 1991. At Volcanoes National Park, each habituated gorilla group is visited once a day by rangers leading tourist groups of up to 5 people for exactly 60 minutes. Our group consisted of Chris and I and good friends that we had made on our overland trip, Jinful Jing and his sister Jin Fei of California, and Mirko from Switzerland. Jin had just spent a little over 2 years serving as a Peace Corps worker in Comoros, Africa, a small island nation in the Indian Ocean just east of Mozambique. With the $10,000 service award he received at the end of his Peace Corps service, Jin had planned an extended journey through East Africa and into Southeast Asia. His sister, a pediatric nurse, had joined him for the first leg of his trip in Africa. I truly admired Jin's adventurous spirit, and we became good friends on the trip. Although there is no guarantee, tourists can choose from what is expected to be an easy, medium, or difficult trek. The degree of the trek's difficulty is based on where the habituated gorilla group was last spotted within the park. Each tourist group may only visit the habituated gorilla group they were assigned to. If that habituated gorilla group is on the move, a trek's difficulty rating will naturally change. Our guide for the journey was a young Rwandan woman named Odell. She was accompanied by a porter, Boniface, who joined us for the entire journey, though none of us asked him to carry anything. He did take our pictures a few times, though. As we hiked up the mountain on a winding pathway through farmers' fields, smiling, waving children would pop up, seemingly from nowhere, greeting us with shouts of, "Hello!" Chris and I never failed to respond back with a "hello," waving as we did so. It was a steep climb up the mist-covered mountain. It did occur to me that I was about the same age that Fossey was when she last climbed Virunga. She needed an oxygen tank then, and I could understand why. We climbed a tremendous distance, and I found the altitude, which ranged from 8,000 to 10,000 feet, to be a challenge. Finally, we arrived at the stone wall that separates Virunga National Park from the farmers' fields. It is stunning that there is absolutely no buffer zone between the park and the farming area that surrounds it. The park is often threatened by illegal settlers who cleared nearly 4,000 acres as recently as 2004. Almost as soon as we entered the park, we were joined by a couple of additional park rangers who tracked and monitored the gorillas. It wasn't long before we caught a glimpse of a gorilla. But this gorilla was not a member of our assigned gorilla group. We were assigned to see the Kuriyama group, led by the silverback Vuba, and so we went on. The Kuriyama group was named after its original leader, the silverback Kuriyama, who was wounded in a fight and died in 2012. When we visited them in July of 2017, the Kuriyama group consisted of 8 gorillas. The group had been ranging on the more dangerous Congolese side of the national park for nearly a year before returning to the Rwandan forest in September of 2016. The group had lost 4 gorillas while it was gone. They may have joined other groups in the Congo, or possibly they had been killed. The Kuriyama group was doing well now and had a new infant that had been born in their absence. Rather unusually, the group now consisted of 7 males and 1 female, 3 silverbacks, 2 blackback males, 1 adult female, 1 infant, and 1 juvenile. A blackback is a sexually mature male of about 10 to 12 years that is still subordinate to the silverback. Blackbacks have not yet gained the silver hair on their backs. Vuba, the group's then dominant silverback, was the son of Titus, who had also faced the challenge of leading a group composed of all males and only 1 female. Dian Fossey had observed Titus when he was just an infant. Fossey wrote that Titus, as an infant, seemed underdeveloped and spindly and had difficulty breathing. Well, Titus had other challenges as well, with his father, uncle, and brother all having been killed by poachers. His mother and sister joined other families after that. When he grew up and became a dominant silverback, Titus sired Vuba, who now led the Kuriyama group. It was all the more exciting to know that the group that we had been assigned to had direct ancestral ties to Dian Fossey, whose life and work is described in depth, as is her still unsolved murder in Episode 2. In Swahili, Vuba, the name of Kuriyama's leader, means quick. Looking back, that should have been the first hint that ours was not going to be a medium truck. The Kuriyama group was on the move and wasn't concerned in the slightest with waiting for us. Our moderate trek soon turned into a very hard trek, even by our guide's standards. Afterward, when we were back at the base, Odell, our guide, said it was one of the most difficult gorilla treks that she'd ever made. It took us nearly 4 hours to find the gorillas. At times, we literally had to scale sheer, slippery, steep rainforest cliffs. The scenery, as well as the altitude, made the trek breathtaking. But I was really becoming exhausted. My wife, Chris, well, she's the mountain climber in the family. I prefer to go down mountain skiing, not hiking up them. I was starting to wonder whether my ashes would soon be spread over Fossey's. I wasn't about to give up, but I was seriously beginning to wonder whether I could make it much further. Just then, Israel, the lead tracker of the Rangers, called me. The silverback was just across the ravine from us. Immediately, I forgot how tired I was. The next hour was pure magic, as Chris and I and our overland friends were surrounded by the 8 mountain gorillas of the Kuriyama family. Trying to imitate Fossey, I sat down near 2 of the gorillas who were wrestling with each other. Unfortunately, I neglected to look first as to where I was sitting. Surprisingly, gorilla dung doesn't smell all that bad. Well, who knows? Maybe they accepted me better because I sat in it. Either that, or they figured I really wanted to see them badly. One of the wrestling gorillas tired of the group and gently brushed past Chris, Mirko, and myself. Jin had his own remarkable encounter with one of the blackbacks. Long pants and sleeves are required for gorilla trekking because of the sharp, thorny shrubbery that lines the trails of the rainforest. The only long pants that Jin had packed were a pair of jammies with a colorful, wild print. Clearly, the gorillas had never seen anything like them. Jin was taking pictures of the gorilla when another one came up behind him, grabbed hold of his pants, and pantsed him. Fortunately, Jin Fei, Jin's sister, snapped a picture of his shocked face and sent it to all of us. The gorilla was clearly curious. Maybe he wanted a pair of those pants for himself. Well, we spent a wondrous hour with our magnificent cousins. The adult female, Mahirwe, had a small infant. Like infants everywhere, the baby was particularly curious in us. He kept rolling and climbing around, finding a new vantage place to watch us. But Mother never let him venture very far from her side. She was definitely a protective mom, and apparently bit another gorilla in the group's nose when that gorilla had become too close to her baby. The injury had worsened somewhat, and the rangers said that they were monitoring the gorilla. If it became infected, they would let the gorilla doctor veterinarians know so they could give it medicine. Another benefit of habituation. The large silverback seemed to be sitting by himself most of the time, feeding and guarding the group. He didn't mind us, but he wasn't going to take his eyes off of us either. What a beautiful silverback he was. Several times I had to fight back tears. No wonder that Fosse was so taken with this place. Looking into the gorilla's eyes, so loving, so peaceful, so expressive, I question which of us was the more evolved species. Of course, we got lots of great pictures, which you can find on our social media pages. With my gray beard, the rangers kept referring to me as a silverback, and at nearly 53, I suppose I was. Chris and I were both older than all the other mountain gorillas, who lived to be 45 at best. I think they knew we were older, just as we can spot an older gorilla from their gray hairs. For the record, my wife doesn't have any gray hair, just lovely brown hair, and she has a lot more of it than I do. As our time with the gorillas came to an end, our group climbed up a steep hill. Before Chris and I could join the rest of the group, a blackback gorilla reached out his arm and stopped us both. He then walked to the top of the hill and sat down in the middle of the trail. "He doesn't want you to leave," Israel said. "It's okay. We can stay a bit longer." The blackback male's actions were unmistakable. We didn't want to go just yet either. The blackback's expressive eyes studied us for a couple of minutes, and then he moved on, and we reluctantly did as well. As we left the gorillas, it didn't seem to take long for us to reach the park boundary again. We crossed the stone wall and began our long journey down the mountain. Along the way, we passed through many farmers' fields planted with potatoes. The United Nations hasn't done the gorillas any favors by introducing potatoes to the locals. Volcanoes National Park shrunk in the 1960s and 1970s as farmers illegally cleared new fields. With the advent of tourism, though, the Rwandan government now recognizes how important the gorillas are and has plans to expand the park once again. The government hopes to increase the park's size by about 23%, adding 3,740 hectares or 9,237 acres, which will be designated for park activities. Over 6,000 hectares or 14,620 acres will become a much-needed new buffer zone to reduce conflict between humans and wildlife. Back at the Centre Pastoral Notre Dame de Fatima, I had cooking duties. I was exhausted, but dragged my way through it. Still, it was a better job than that which a young man offered to perform for us, washing our clothes. I had some pants with gorilla dung stains that badly needed washing. The poor kid washed them for me, looking completely grossed out as he did so. I made sure I tipped him handsomely. The Dian Fossey Gorilla Fund actively tracks gorilla families, primarily on the Rwandan side of the parks. In the years since our 2017 visit, the Kiriyama Group has been very successful and has grown to 18 members. As of November 2024, the group now consists of 4 silverbacks, 5 females, 6 infants, and 3 blackbacks. Mahirwe, the mother we saw with her infant in 2017, has a total of 4 children, all of whom remained in the group. The oldest, Igiso, 22 years old, is now the dominant silverback of the group. Once Africa gets in your blood, she never leaves. Africa is the cradle of humanity. The remains of the earliest man were found there. As such, I believe each of us, whether we recognize it or not, yearn to go to Africa. When we go there, we feel that we are at home at last. The warm, friendly people, the majestic scenery, and the wild animals fill our hearts with joy. Each time I leave Africa, I yearn for her once again, almost immediately. Chris fell in love with Africa after her visit, just as I did back in 1991. Amazingly, we returned again in 2018, 2019, 2022, and 2024. Each time we traveled a different way. In 2019, when we went to South Africa, Botswana, and Zimbabwe, we did so with Exodus Travels, which offers a camping safari with a slightly smaller group than overlanding and fewer responsibilities. In 2018, 2022, and 2024, we created our own itineraries for Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda, and hired a local, well-established, trusted safari operator from Nairobi, Kenya, named Game Trackers Ltd., to provide the guide, cook, and transport. There's no right or wrong way to go to Africa. Just get there any way that you can. Having seen the mountain gorillas of the Volcanoes National Park, Chris and I wanted to see the mountain gorillas of the Bwindi Impenetrable Forest. The visit there also gave us the opportunity to return to an excellent local school, an orphanage named Little Angels in Lake Banyoni, Kabale. Founded in 2011 by Duncan Musingusi Nelson when he was 24 years old, the school has helped 480 registered needy children under their care between the ages of 3 and 14 years old. After our initial visit there in 2017, Chris and I fundraised for the school and sponsored students, so it was great to return in 2022 to see what improvements had been made. Better internet, new toilets, new classrooms, all showed that the money had been put to good use. The Bwindi Impenetrable Forest gets its intriguing name from its dense vegetation, and locals sometimes refer to it as a place full of darkness because little sunlight penetrates its dense canopy. Bwindi became a national reserve in 1942 and was upgraded to a national park in 1992 and was named a World Heritage Site in 1994. The Impenetrable Forest is home to approximately 459 mountain gorillas, or 45% of the total population of roughly 1,063, as well as other critically endangered species. In his excellent book, The Impenetrable Forest, Thor Hansen details his work as a U.S. Peace Corps worker with local guides and trackers to develop ecotourism and mountain gorilla trekking at Bwindi Impenetrable Forest. It took 3 years to habituate the Mubari gorilla to humans. The lead silverback, Ruendeza, proved to be exceptional at interacting with humans, paving the way for gorilla tourism. Gorilla trekking was open to the public in 1993 at Bwindi Impenetrable Forest. Ecotourism at Bwindi Impenetrable Forest suffered a major blow in March 1999 when over 100 former Rwandan Interahamwe guerrillas infiltrated across the border from the Congo and kidnapped 14 tourists and their guide from the Impenetrable Forest headquarters. The tourists were tortured and at least one female was raped. 6 of the tourists were eventually released, but the other 8 were murdered with machetes and clubs. The guide was burned alive after being doused with gasoline. The Interahamwe attack was meant to discourage tourism from the park, thus depriving the Ugandan government of much-needed income. After the attack, the park was closed for several months. The attack resulted in a sharp decline in tourism in the park for several years. But as security increased, tourism returned to the park. Today, a Ugandan soldier carrying an AK-47 is assigned to each guerrilla trekking group to provide security. While the Congo sadly remains in the state of lawlessness, there has not been any repeats of the 1999 terrorist attack on tourists. The well-armed guards accompanying the guerrilla tourist groups have discouraged any copycat attempts. As a result, it is very safe today to see the mountain gorillas at Bwindi. As with Volcanoes National Park, tourists at Bwindi's Impenetrable Forest gather at first at the park headquarters, where they register to pay their fees. It is less expensive to see the mountain gorillas in the impenetrable forest in Uganda than it is at Volcanoes National Park in Rwanda. Pricing for 2025 to 2026 is $800 US dollars for foreign non-residents and $700 for foreign residents, $500 for African passport holders, and $83 US dollars for East African residents. We loved the fact that Uganda made it cheaper for local residents to have the opportunity to see mountain gorillas. We fall in love with what we know, and we protect what we love, so it's important for local Africans to experience the wonders of their national parks. In comparison, Rwanda's Volcanoes National Park gorilla trekking permits currently cost $1,500 US dollars for foreign residents, $500 for East African residents, and $200 for Rwandan citizens. Whatever the cost, though, the opportunity to trek to see the mountain gorillas is priceless. As at Volcanoes National Park, tourists at the park headquarters are entertained by local indigenous people while the rangers process their permits. The local women were dressed in beautiful, colorful dresses and sang several lovely songs. I was pleased to see that nearly everyone there tipped them. Then, the head ranger gave a very nice but very long history of the park, with much information about the mountain gorillas. Gorilla trekking groups at the impenetrable forest are a bit larger than at Volcanoes, with a limit of 8 tourists per group instead of just 5 at Volcanoes. However, Chris and I got very lucky. We were assigned to a group with just 2 other people, a couple from Mexico. Most of Bwindi's impenetrable forest rests at less than half of the elevation of the Virunga Mountains. The Virungas can reach an elevation of 4,507 meters, or 14,786 feet, while most of the impenetrable forest ranges from 1,160 to 2,607 meters, or 3,805 to 8,553 feet. The lower altitude makes Bwindi's impenetrable forest much easier to trek. However, it is still a challenge, though, due to its dense vegetation. On our trek, we crossed perhaps as many as 7 streams, some of which were challenging to cross. We also had to be observant so as not to fall into the large holes alongside the trail, one of which was an abandoned gold mine and would have been a very long fall indeed. The COVID pandemic was in its final stages in 2022, so I was pleased that we were required to wear masks in the gorilla's presence. Because our DNA is 98% similar to mountain gorilla DNA, gorillas are susceptible to all of the same diseases as human beings, so the masks help to prevent our germs from spreading. As we trekked through the impenetrable forest, I was particularly pleased to see the tracks of forest elephants as well as some fresh elephant dung. Forest elephants are critically endangered, and there are only about 30 to 50 in all of the impenetrable forest. They are exceedingly rare to see. Our guide for the trekking, Isna, spoke as many as 10 different languages and knew everything there was to know about gorillas. It never ceases to amaze me at how many languages Africans are fluent in. It puts most of us from the United States, limited to just English, to shame. Just as we were starting to get tired, our guide announced that we were there. Masks on, backpacks off, water bottles put away, and cameras only with no flashes. For over an hour, we observed the Mishea group, which was originally formed in 2010 when its dominant silverback, Mishea, broke from the Shangi family group. Mishea was an ambitious silverback and wasn't afraid to take on silverbacks from other gorilla families to add females to his own family group. When Mishea died in 2014 at the age of 28 from complications due to an intestinal blockage, the group's surviving members dispersed. But under the leadership of Tinfeo, the group reformed in 2018 and in 2022 consisted of 10 gorillas, including 2 infants. As of 2024, the Mishea group consisted of 1 silverback, 5 adult females, 1 juvenile, and 2 infants. Because the impenetrable forest is so dense and lush, it is a little harder to see the gorillas there, even though we were just as close as at Volcanoes. As the gorillas went about eating their breakfast, leaves and fruit, they mostly ignored us. We saw a mother with her toddler, who, as with all children, seemed pretty interested in us. While we were watching the toddler, another gorilla dropped down from a tree right behind us. When observing mountain gorillas, most of the time they're on the ground, unlike chimpanzees, who often climb high up into the trees. The best viewing of our visit came at the end. Tinfeo, the silverback, was trying to take a nap, while a small infant, no more than 5 months old, was playing on top of him. The little baby just played and played on his back, rolling around. His papa did his best to ignore him and try to catch some shut-eye, but the baby would beat on his chest and just clowned around. We were no more than 5 feet away, sitting on the ground. Several times the silverback opened his eyes and scratched his chin, looking at us. At one point, the little baby started crawling right towards us. He came within 3 feet of Chris and I, and then turned back. We have video of that baby on our sister Facebook page. All wonders come to an end. Our guide announced that we had already exceeded an hour, but he had given us a little additional time because our group was so small. The other couple with us had already lost interest, something that Chris and I could never do. Although friendly enough, the other couple was less interested in the gorillas and more interested in taking selfies of themselves and each other. They were also pretty disappointed to learn that we had to go back the same way we came in. Our guide asked Chris and I to go last to help the morale of the other couple who were having some difficulty. Guides have to have an understanding of psychology as well as a thorough knowledge of the habitat and the animals within it. It took us about 3 hours to trek to see the gorillas and about 2 hours to return once we had found them. The 5-hour trek was much less demanding than the 8 to 9 hour trek that we did at Volcanoes National Park in Rwanda. My wife and I have been truly blessed to see the mountain gorillas at both of the national parks that they're endemic to, Volcanoes National Park in Rwanda and the Bwindi Impenetrable Forest of Uganda. I was also incredibly fortunate to see the eastern lowland gorillas and the always dangerous Democratic Republic of the Congo at Kahuzi-Biega in 1991. I can understand how Dian Fossey, the great heroine of the mountain gorillas, never got tired of watching them. Dian Fossey carefully printed in block letters her last entry in her journal before she was murdered on December 26, 1985.
When you realize the value of all life, you dwell less on what is past and concentrate more on the preservation of the future.
Wildlife across the planet is under threat as never before. Human activities have caused the world's wildlife populations to plummet by more than 2/3 in the last 50 years, according to the Living Planet Report 2020 from the World Wildlife Fund. The Living Planet Report 2020 drew on wildlife monitoring of more than 4,300 different vertebrate species, mammals, fish, birds, and amphibians from around the world. It found that population sizes for those monitored species declined by an average of 68% from 1970 to 2016. In the American tropics, including the Caribbean and Latin America, population sizes decreased by a staggering 94%. Deforestation for agricultural use and climate change are the major drivers. The decline is happening at an unprecedented rate, the report warns, and it threatens human life as well. The findings are clear, the report states. Our relationship with nature is broken. Scientists have long warned that the world is entering a sixth mass extinction driven by humanity's consumption of wildlife and wild spaces and the burning of fossil fuels. The United Nations published a sweeping report in 2019 cautioning that 1 million of the estimated 8 million plant and animal species on the planet are at risk of extinction, many within decades, because of human activities. No wonder primatologist Dr. Jane Goodall warned that we were living in one of the darkest times in human history. In my own country, our President Trump has ignored the overwhelming evidence of climate change and rolled back environmental regulations, even as he has weakened endangered species protections. Instead of going in the right direction, President Trump is moving the United States backwards at an alarming rate. And yet, there is still reason for hope. The mountain gorillas are a rare success story. With only 1,000 left in the world, their future remains uncertain. Yet responsible ecotourism has increased their numbers from a low of 250 in the 1970s when extinction seemed inevitable to over 1,000 today. As the gorilla numbers have increased, ecotourism has flourished, and along with it, much-needed dollars into local African communities, building schools and clinics, and providing good-paying jobs. Clearly, as UNESCO Director General Audrey Azoulay has said, protecting biodiversity amounts to protecting humanity. While there is reason to hope, there is still much work to be done. As Dr. Jane Goodall said in her New Year's Eve address in 2018,
there is still so much in the world worth fighting for, so much that is beautiful, so many wonderful people working to reverse the harm, to help alleviate the suffering, and so many young people dedicated to making this a better world, all conspiring to inspire us and to give us hope that it's not too late to turn things around if we all do our part.
Hope requires action. Each of us can make a difference. Every action that you take matters, however small. Instead of using plastic bags, bring your own bags to the grocery store. Instead of drinking water from plastic bottles, which is dangerous to your health because of the microplastics that you can ingest as well as bad for the environment, fill up your own reusable water bottle. Support environmental organizations. Vote for candidates who believe in the threat of climate change and want to protect the environment. The world is on the brink. Mountain gorillas were once on the brink not so long ago, but together we can pull ourselves back from the brink before more damage is done. No world leader, no matter how large their ego or their boasts, will remain in power forever. There is more to this world than greed. Together we must make a difference and save the wild places and those that inhabit it. In doing so, we will save ourselves. Africans have a saying, think 7 generations ahead. Most of my fellow citizens in the United States struggle to think even 1 generation ahead. But what a better world we would have if we think 7 generations ahead. How would our actions be different? Indigenous people, the world over, live in harmony with nature. They understand that we are all part of the same community of nature and that each of us has a role to play in protecting our 4-legged brothers and sisters. When I am in nature, I feel as though I leave a better person. When I observe nature's wildlife, I become closer to the God that created all living things. Most indigenous people believe that animals can help guide us through life's challenges. Gorillas teach us the importance of communication and that listening can be more important than speaking. Gorilla silverbacks teach us to respect ourselves and all those around us. Gorillas teach us to be gentle, tender and compassionate with each other, and only to become aggressive if our loved ones are threatened. Gorillas remind us that we are social animals and that we need to stay connected with each other and especially our families, who we should be loyal and protective towards. Thank you for listening to Part 3 of Gorillas in Our Midst, the miniseries from Our Wild World. If you missed the other episodes, I encourage you to go back and listen to them. Part 1 focused on the eastern lowland gorillas that I trekked to see at Kahuzi-Biega National Park in 1991 in the Congo, as well as my capture by Rwandan soldiers when I took a picture of the presidential palace and was accused of being a terrorist. Part 2 focused on mountain gorillas and their savior, Dian Fossey, her life, achievements, and her untimely death. I also suggest who may have been responsible based on my conversations with those who knew her best. This entire miniseries is dedicated to my hero, American scientist Dian Fossey. No one loved gorillas more. I have no doubt that gorillas would not walk this planet today had it not been for Dian Fossey, who gave the supreme sacrifice, her life, to save this wonderful and majestic species for future generations. We all owe Dian Fossey a great debt, and if you are so able, I encourage you to donate to the Dian Fossey Gorilla Fund to make sure that we live in a world with gorillas. This concludes our episode. Please be sure to check out our sister Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, or X pages for accompanying pictures my wife and I have taken in Africa. If you enjoyed this podcast, please be sure to like it, follow it, and leave us a review. Be sure to tell your friends. New episodes are released every 2 weeks on Tuesdays. Please join me again for Our Wild World. You can contact me anytime at ourwildworldshow@gmail.com. I'm also available to give talks on many of the animals featured in this series. You can download a flyer with my available talks from our Facebook page. The talks are free as long as they are within a 1-hour radius of Rockford, Illinois. I do suggest a minimum donation of at least $50 to a wildlife charity for each talk. Thank you for listening, and remember, every breath you take connects you with every other living being on this planet. You are a part of nature. Love it, protect it, and nature will never disappoint you, strengthening and healing you in return.